Hey guys, Starlite Pulpcast here. I believe this is number 22 or 3, something like that. My name is Brian Townsley, and tonight we've got Alec Cizak with us. He has a new book out called Nobody's Coming Home. It is a collection of crime stories. It's a short collection, but I want to say there's 12 or 13 stories in here. And Alec, you this is your fifth book with ABC, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And so a lot of these were published. I do want to point out that one of these was published actually in Starlight Pulp Review number 2, which was just out a few months ago, and called Miscarriage, which we were very happy to put out. So how's the feedback been so far for the book?
Well, everybody who's read it enjoys it. So I guess it's doing okay. It's an indie book, as you know, so
Yeah, yeah, of course.
we don't know how many people have. I don't know how many people have actually read it yet, but the people who've talked to me, they like it. So I guess that's the most important thing.
Absolutely, right. Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay. So a couple of things I want to touch on are, first off, that you are really efficient with your language. A lot of these stories are somewhere between 8 and 12 pages, and there's a couple longer ones, but for the most part, they're right in that range. And I know when I'm writing, which is funny because I actually started out as a poet, so I certainly wrote some poems back in the day that were probably 10, 12 lines long, and that that was the whole thing. And yet with my stories, I tend to sometimes I'm at 25, 35 pages by the time I'm done. So I want to talk a little bit about that, because you do a really good job of kind of creating these minimalist kind of unflinching uh, prose that can be very spare, but also gets to kind of the heart of the characters. So how do you go about doing that?
I think the main thing is obsessive religious revision, and the more you revise, the more you. I think actually it could be detrimental what I do. I sometimes worry about this, that the more you revise, the more familiar you are with the story, to the
Sure.
point where someone else's, sometimes my wife will read the latest draft to me, and I know every sentence that's coming right before she reads it.
Interesting.
And I think that, yeah, it's internalized so much that I get to a point where as I'm, I probably don't need to revise it anymore, but I'm also obsessive about the aesthetics of the prose itself. I don't like needless repetition. You'll see phrases and words repeated in a lot of work that doesn't need to be. It can be said differently or eliminated. Anyway, I will understand the story so well that I will start to take stuff out that I think, well, it's implied elsewhere, or the reader can figure this out on their own. And so, whether it's a good or bad thing, I think that's why that happens. And it's funny that you bring that up, because I'm trying to write a novel, um, a I don't want to say a mainstream novel, but something a little bit less than what I normally do in terms of how graphic or brutally honest
Uh-huh.
I want to be. And I've been talking with a lot of people in this group on Facebook, crime fiction writers, and they all have told me you have to write 80,000 words for a novel, a mass market kind of novel.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, I don't need 80,000 words to tell a story. I don't need that.
Right.
So it's a struggle for me, actually. I wish that I wrote more, to be honest.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I'm going to give you a different perspective here, because from my perspective, I some of my very favorite books are on the shorter side, and sometimes even like novella length. I mean, you look at the majority of like a lot of Steinbeck's work; those are novellas. I mean, Of Mice and Men, for example, I wouldn't list that as one of my favorites, but the point is, Of Mice and Men is like 110 pages. I mean, That's not a novel. These days, you know, you turn 110 pages into a major publisher, and they'll look at you like, what is this? you know,
Right.
you know. So I mean, I'm not disagreeing with the group on Facebook. That I'm sure they're right in terms of the number there, but but I guess my question would be, why do you want to get to that? You know what I mean? Like what about that is important? If you can tell the story in less, why not tell in less?
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I agree with you on a couple things. I think some of my favorite books are novellas. One of my absolute favorite books is Quiet Days and Clichy by Henry Miller.
Mm-hmm.
You can sit down in the bathroom and read that in probably an hour or so. I think that Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is about novella length. That's
It's
one of
short,
my
yeah,
all-time favorites.
yeah.
My favorite Jim Thompson book, Pop 1280,
Oh,
is
love
not
that.
that's not an 80,000 word book.
No,
And I agree. If you can tell it in fewer words, you should. Um, I've always been a little bit self-conscious ever since I read Stephen King's book on writing,
mm-hmm.
because he says in there, he says, well, if your paragraphs are very short, you really don't have anything significant to say. And I agree and disagree with it. And
Sure.
going back to this notion of saying a lot with a minimal amount of words, that's actually, because you brought up poetry,
Mm-hmm.
that's something I think you can improve upon in your prose by writing poetry.
I agree.
I used to have this saying that the hierarchy of writers is like the hierarchy of primate man and Superman, according to Nietzsche. So the novelist is the primate, right? And
Right.
then man is the short story writer, and the Superman is the poet, because the Superman can say the most with the least amount of words.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that there's something to be said about doing that. That should be one way to measure a writer. But I think with commercial fiction, a lot of readers want to be really immersed.
Mm-hmm.
So a rule that I follow, that I tend to follow when I'm writing, is whether it's a character or a location or something that needs to be described, I never put in more than two or three details. But everything gets a those two or three details. So if you have a character who walks into a gas station
Mm-hmm.
and buys a pack of cigarettes, the clerk at the gas station will also get two or three lines of description. So maybe that's my compromise between the great verbose novelists
You're right.
and
Right.
and the minimalists like Raymond Carver.
Sure. Yeah,
Uh,
and that's interesting. And you know what? I love Stephen King. I'm a huge King fan. I'm going to disagree with him on that one. Um, and say that,
yeah.
you know, I think that you know, great to me, great writing comes in all different shapes and sizes. And you know, like you mentioned, I mean, Thompson's one of my very favorite writers, and so I'm going to do you big. I'm going to do you big up here because some of the stories in this remind me of Thompson in
Hmm.
that they're very unafraid and they're very spare, and those are very much compliments. And I think that I'm not telling you, hey, you want to go out and write that 80,000 word novel,
Yeah.
you go do that. I'm just saying, I don't know, I don't know that it's necessary per se. I mean, I've read, 1,000-page books that I've loved, and I've read, 105-page books that I've loved, and um, there's room for all of them. Somebody who I think was who was really good at being both a prose stylist and being spare at the same time was McCarthy, right? In that he could write something that would be kind of esoteric and poignant and spare all at the same time, you know. So yeah, I don't know. Um, but I one of the things that you do in these stories, for sure, and anybody that reads these stories will see this right away, is that you really kind of give voice to those folks kind of on the lower rungs of the ladder in the American experiment, you know. Um, but by giving them voice, you also give them life, you also give them character, and and unlike say a F. Scott Fitzgerald or Bret Easton Ellis, somebody like that that focuses on very different aspects of society. You, like Thompson, kind of focus on the underbelly a little bit. Why do you think that's the focus?
Well, yeah, I've always been kind of on the outside of society looking in. I don't know why. Actually, I do. I was adopted. I think that just instills that in you. And I know a lot of these people. These people are all based on friends of mine, people I've known
Okay.
throughout the years. And I endured an MFA program once, and my thesis advisor referred to my characters as lowlifes.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
that's always kind of stuck with me. It's like, well, why are they lowlifes? The even like just a brutal murderer, if you sit down and talk to him or her or them, um, you will meet a human being. And so
sure,
my point of view is why not look at everyone as a human being? And,
absolutely.
and you know, and I guess by writing stories like that, I'm inviting people who normally wouldn't hang out with a drug dealer or a woman who works for an escort service or whatever, to reconsider, because we really, this society is so judgmental, and
Hmm. Hmm.
it's I just I think that's the job of a writer, isn't it? Is to create empathy
Sure,
for everybody in society. So
sure.
I
I
don't know. Mhm.
one of my very favorite quotes, Alec, from Elmore Leonard is, he somebody asked him about his characters and how he looks at them and how he gives life to these kind of, as we just referred to them, low life characters. And he said, look, at the end of the day, every single character I write, regardless of where they are, is just trying to be happy.
Mm.
And you have to look at it that way. Like this is whatever they're trying to do is their happiness. It might be misguided, but it's still how they view how they can be happy. And at the end of the day, if you look at it like that, it makes every character very human, because rather than looking at them like a quote unquote low life, then all of a sudden they're just a person trying to figure out the next step, right? And I think you do a good job of that. but but one thing you mentioned there that I think is interesting, because it hits in a couple of the stories in this collection, is you talked about how judgmental we are, right? And we are, as a culture, we are. Social media certainly doesn't make it any better. And one of the stories that I read, I actually read it last night, before I was going to bed, was Destroyers. And in that story, there is for lack of, well, no, we'll just call him what he is. He's an internet troll, right? Who essentially, one guy gets who hasn't had any luck, throughout most of his life, gets the just the tiniest bit of luck, and then this guy sets out to essentially destroy him on the internet, because he's gotten this tiny little bit of luck, which I think says a lot about not only us as a culture, but also the what we have, the ability to do, online, which is certainly unfortunate. But you used one line in it, that I loved, which was, you referred to this as the age of the lazy Inquisition,
Mm.
which I think is fantastic, because that's any internet troll, sitting in their little, cave with their computer, can pull up anything. And none of us are perfect, none of us. And so and the internet is that like this device that just seeks to find that out. And I think that's a little bit of a theme that runs through a couple of these. So why don't you touch on that for a second?
Well, I've witnessed this multiple times. I've actually been the target of internet trolls. Um, it's weird to me that people they have I guess it's like everything else that's strange in American society that's strange to the rest of the world, or in Western society that's strange to the rest of the world. We're a population that has far too much free time, and now you've put this weapon in the hand or in the hands of people who don't have anything to do with their lives. It's just it's called destroyers because I kind of boil people down. Well, there's not everybody, but there's two very important kinds of people in the world. There's destroyers and creators, and destroyers are always, it seems like they're going after creators. And it's weird. I don't, we could sit here and talk for hours about
Mhm.
how this has all happened, but somehow, social media has given a weapon to people who I think really have nothing valuable going on in their lives. And they could change that. They could get up out of their mother's basement or whatever and go do something with their
Right.
lives. But it's much easier just to sit in your pajamas, shove potato chips into your mouth, and because this what happens in destroyers, that happens all the time. You'll always see somebody exalted in some way, some
Hmm.
nobody, quote unquote
Hmm.
nobody, right?
Yeah, yeah, just a normal
And
dude. Yeah.
within a few days you'll get the counter narrative. Oh, in 1972, this guy shoplifted a pack of certs.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's a terrible human being. We can't say nice things about him or her or whoever, right? And it is a kind of inquisition. It's a kind of a Salem witch trial. It's even kind of a manifest destiny. It's this trait in humans,
Yeah.
that we really want to have gotcha moments at other people's expenses. And not all of us, but
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a portion of the population that I think, is addicted to this, gets an endorphin rush off of ruining other people's lives and reputations.
That's
And I
crazy, isn't
won't.
it?
It is crazy, and I won't mince words. I think people like that are absolutely disgusting.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
just
No.
I will judge them. I'm sorry. I mean, I'm
Right,
not
right,
sorry.
right. No, and I get that. And I saw a post the other day that said, when you're on the way up, everybody roots for you because they see themselves in you. But when you get to the top, everybody wants to tear you down because you remind them of what they gave up or what they didn't get. And
Mm.
I thought that was an interesting thought. I don't know that it's necessarily true, but I thought it was an interesting thought because you're very right. We do this thing where we it there's so much negativity out there, online and on social media and things like that, and it's so unnecessary. Like in our little world, right, in our little pulp writing world, it's actually, and I've been surprised to learn this, but it's actually really small. It's a small little group out there between your Facebook fiction group and the Instagram group that we're a part of, and things like that. And there's absolutely no reason to tear one another down. There really isn't. And we do it, we do. I mean, everybody else does it too. I'm not singling out us for sure, but it's such a, and it's a part of human nature, and it's unfortunate because it's so unnecessary. We should be, there's a quote that says, I can't compete against you because I want you to win too. And that concept, I like that so much more, you know, than what a lot of people do.
Well, I would add that, when this stuff goes on in an arts community, whether it's a writing community or a film community, um, that is a it's a very popular thing that happens now. It's been happening for a few years, especially in crime fiction and horror. It's a way to actually eliminate competition that you don't think you can deal with. If I'm not a particularly good filmmaker, let's say, and I'm somewhat aware of people who are not, you know, I'm sure they have to be aware of it if they're not particularly good. If I can tear down another filmmaker who's at the same level as me by misappropriating and weaponizing social justice terminology, this is the way it's done now. I just lob the accusation is the evidence. I just lob it. Bob over there is a misogynist. I know it. He's a misogynist, and then it spreads like wildfire on Twitter. And the next thing you know, Bob can't get work, and
Right.
Bob is now out of the way. Bob is no longer a competitor. So I like your attitude. That's the way I approach things. I want everybody to succeed,
Hmm.
but there are people who I think they are for whatever reason they're afraid to compete, I guess, in a fair manner,
Sure.
whether it's to compete on the page as writers or on the screen as filmmakers, or if you're musicians. I'm sure it goes on in every artistic community, kind of
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it does.
backstabbing kind of stuff.
Hmm.
And again, I guess I would say if you feel like you need to go to those lengths, maybe find something else to do. Maybe find a different career path or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so something one of the themes that a lot of the stories in this come back to, and I think a decent amount of your fiction just in general is that um, there is this kind of blue collar, poverty stricken, rural America that sees kind of a farce of the American dream, and that's certainly not a new theme per se, but it is something that kind of has a vein through some of your work. And one of the things I want to ask you is this, and I'm just curious on your thoughts because because it seems to me, and feel free to disagree with me, that it seems more like that now than it was when we were younger. And maybe that's because I was young and I was hopeful. or maybe maybe I'm off base entirely. Thompson in the 1950s might have disagreed with me 100%, but it seems to me like the whatever American dream we thought there was in the, say, the 70s or the 80s is very different than the one we have right now. Do you think that's accurate?
I do. I would preface everything by saying the American dream itself is an invention of Hollywood, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually, people might be surprised to hear me say this, but I think it's a wonderful invention. Um, the thrust of it was that you work very hard at whatever it is you want to do, and there's a chance, especially if you're poor or you're middle class, or if you're not filthy rich, if you're not part of the power elite, there's a chance that you can hoist yourself out of the situation you're in. This is why people come from all over the world to become American citizens.
Yeah.
And there used to be some rules about that. My parents who raised me were post World War II
Mm-hmm.
immigrants, and they were poor, and they came, and my dad worked in a steel mill to put him and my mom through college. This is in the 1960s. You can imagine
Outstanding.
today, yeah, if you work in a steel mill today, you struggle to pay your bills. And here he was
Right.
able to put two people through college. and then they went to college and they worked their way to the middle class. And then, of course, I grew up under that the belief that that's how things worked. And
Sure.
so then I went
Yep.
to college and got a nearly useless English degree, and ended up driving a delivery truck. And I learned
Mhm.
very quickly, oh, this it doesn't work this way anymore. And I would, without getting too geopolitical about it, I think one of the main problems is that um, with just corporations have whittled they the big corporations buy the little corporations. Everything gets whittled down to we're at a place where I think just like three major corporations have they own everything. And so at the top of the pyramid is a money person. Money people don't think the way you and I think, and
Right.
that's why in our field, when we grew up, there were many different imprints that published all kinds of writers.
Yeah.
Uh, the 80s, splatter punk came up, and that's a genre
Mhm.
today that it's because it's established, you can, if you're splatter punk, you can get published with a relatively well-known publisher. But if it were to have been invented now,
Oh, never.
it would never see the light of day.
Mhm.
Because the money people at the top can't take risks. They can't take risks. So when I talk about, and this is actually a little bit off topic, I apologize, but when I talk about the difference between indie and the big five or whatever it is, um, I'm not talking about it out of resentment or anger or anything.
Mhm.
I'm just looking at it objectively.
Yeah.
If you are investing a whole lot of money into two or three writers to get the books into the airport bookstores and whatnot,
Sure.
you need to provide something that's not going to scare away any dollars. And so it's to me, it's a good. I like the balance that in the at the indie level, we can do what we want. And
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
where the
It's
great
true.
experiments take place. Is where the great the new genre that whatever subgenre that's just waiting to be born is going to be born here. Um, but it is a little bit different. When I was a kid, I felt like, well, even if I write stuff that the masses aren't going to enjoy, there will still be enough of a market out there that some little publisher,
Yeah.
which is the case, but there isn't the same level of exposure for independent art.
No.
The art is out there. There's great independent film being made. There's great independent music, great independent books. But the people who really want these are our people. The people who really want to consume that, they have to go looking for it. And
Oh yeah.
when you're working three jobs to pay your bills, you don't necessarily have the time to sit there and scour the internet for
Sure.
the
Sure.
best indie art out there.
Sure. In a lot of ways, and I'm making this up on the fly, Alex. So if I'm off here, feel free. But it occurred to me when you were talking there. I see a lot of the same equivalencies, if you will, with cinema, right? Which is in that there was this fantastic, ridiculously good decade of the 70s where you had these tours that were, writer directors and the Francis Ford Coppola's and so many others that were Peckinpahs and so many others that were making these wonderful films. And they were very much doing it on their own artistic vision. And some of them made money, some of them didn't, you know. But a lot of even if they flopped, a lot of them we look back now and go, oh, that was a hell of a movie, right? And then the 80s and 90s changed things, and it became all about the sequels and the one-liners and the a lot of that artistic splash that we had in the 70s kind of left. And I kind of feel like you could make the same equivalency with regards to the publishing business, because maybe not same decades, but the point is that now you try to name me five big authors besides Stephen King who every single book they write isn't a part of a series.
Hmm.
And it's the same thing in Hollywood. The majority of the movies we're seeing, they're all comic book movies. They're all sequels. They're all a part of this larger quote unquote universe. Very rarely do we see really artistic, one-off, brilliant works come out through either major Hollywood or any of the big five publishing companies. It seems to me. Now, again, I'm just making this up as I go, but that's kind of what it seems like to me right now. It seems to me like there's an equivalency there because, and again, unfortunately, if that's true, if anything I'm saying is true, it's all about money.
It is about money.
And like you said, not taking a chance, not wanting to risk it, you know?
Yeah, it is about money, especially with Hollywood. If you're making, if your budget is $300 million, you cannot afford to lose. And so it's a bit like going to the casino and your choice is between blackjack and roulette. And I think that most people, like the safe table is the blackjack table. Your chances are better at doing well there. So if let's say you're a big time studio producer or studio head, and you get this wonderful, innovative, creative, original script from the middle of Kansas, some guy from the middle of Kansas, he's come up with something you've never seen before, or you have somebody who's written the latest reboot of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You say, well, I know Texas Chainsaw Massacre has an audience. I can sell this at least to them. So I know that we'll at least we'll at least break even. I don't know. And I have this conversation a lot with people. And one thing that we need to mention, because we could sit here and blame the money people all we want. The money people are doing exactly what the audience tells them to do.
Oh yeah.
And so because I talk to everybody and they all agree this is not entertaining what's happening.
No.
The same movie, the same book being thrown at them over and over again. And I say, well, what are you doing to change that? Because it's very simple. The way capitalism is supposed to work is that you vote with your dollars. So if everybody, for instance, Disney, and I knew this would happen as soon as Disney bought the rights to Star Wars. I knew that was it for Star Wars. And frankly, let's be honest, like Star Wars hasn't been very good since The Empire Strikes Back. But I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of hate mail for that. I don't care. I saw the original Star Wars in the theater, so it means a whole lot. Yeah, it means a whole lot more to me than it does to any middle-aged fanboy who collects action figures. The fact of the matter is that Disney, I knew when they got a hold of it, they were going to scrape the bottom of that barrel for every possible dollar. That's exactly what they've done. My question to the general public is, why are we still giving them those dollars? Why? I mean, it's very easy. You say, oh, the new Star Wars movie is going to suck. Okay, so don't you have one of the older ones on DVD? Just watch that again. Yeah. Keep watching that until they get the message, because money people will get the message.
Yeah.
The other thing is, and I bet that every studio and every publisher, I bet they do put out one or two products that are original.
Oh, I'm sure they do. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And I bet that the majority of the time they don't do well. Well, that's the other thing that the audience needs to. You need to pay attention when they do put out something really good. Reward them for it. Send the message that you want to see more of that. Fargo, when Pulp Fiction, when Pulp Fiction came out, a big message was sent to Hollywood, and then the next thing you knew, you saw we had like 5 years of Pulp Fiction ripoffs.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Which I guess is the wrong message for Hollywood. Like the message should have been more original stuff.
Yeah.
But we still saw I think they took a lot of risks in the late 90s. I think Boogie Nights was a risk. I think Big Lebowski was a risk.
Well, there are some directors that get to a certain level and realize they're big enough that they can now take chances.
Mhm.
And so you've got those, like, Tarantino can do whatever he wants at this point, just like, Scorsese and Paul Thomas Anderson, I think, was the one that did Boogie Nights, if I remember correctly.
Mhm.
And he had a couple of very successful smaller films, and that was kind of like, okay, well, now I'm gonna take this next step and do kind of what I want to do. And Boogie Nights ended up working out too. Good for him. But one thing I want to bring up is we talk about this stuff, but at the same time, you and I both know this, is that the counterculture aspect of the people in the scenes, whatever those scenes are, right? Whether it's the punk rock scenes or the weird literary scenes, back in the 60s and 70s, where there were all of 10 bookstores in LA where you could find Bukowski books. The people that knew where to find them knew where to go. Just like with the newest punk rock bands that are coming out in the late 70s and 80s and even early 90s, you knew what clubs to go to, you knew where to go for that stuff. There's always going to be those people, and that's and that's a really cool thing. That's a great thing. And that's kind of how I feel like with kind of what Starlight's trying to do, but also just in general, kind of independent small presses, is you do want to create that niche, right? Where you've got people that, yeah, the mainstream aren't going to know about it. They're never going to know about it unless they stumble upon it. But the fact of the matter is that you want those people that do care to know where to go. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Well, you made me think of the '80s when alternative music was actually alternative, and it wasn't played on the radio. And in
Yeah.
Indianapolis, I grew up in Indianapolis, and we had two local chains, record chains, Karma Records and Trax Records. I worked at Trax my senior year in high school, and those were the places you went to get the music that you could not hear on the radio. Everybody
Mhm.
who was interested in that knew that, went there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
I don't,
absolutely.
and we also it helped that I don't know there was more of a interest in that kind of stuff. There was there were magazines dedicated to it, and the word the chain of information just seemed more. It's odd. It seemed more accessible then,
Yeah.
whereas it should be now.
Weirdly,
Because
right? Yeah, like I remember, back in that time, there were the hip thing at the time was kind of the college radio stations, right? Where
mm-hmm.
they would be playing the garage bands and they'd be playing the Replacements and the Husker Doos and the Pixies and stuff that you couldn't find on mainstream radio, and they were, or your local bands, obviously, and there are a ton of those. I was either in LA or the Bay Area at that time, and there were a ton of them, but you just, like you said, it almost in a funny way seemed more accessible because once you knew where to go, you knew you could always go there for it. Whereas now with the internet, it somehow feels more splintered in a way, which doesn't make much sense. It's like somebody should be bringing it together, but I'm not sure that it's working that way.
Well, the other thing is I think that the internet it's a blessing and a curse, and you can see it with the streaming platforms.
Oh yeah.
If you sit down and you just turn on any streaming platform, you're going to spend like 3 hours trying to decide what to watch because there's so much available. So that's the other problem is it's a problem. It's a blessing and a problem. It's a blessing to artists that there are just tons of avenues now where you can try to distribute your art. But
Yeah.
now the audience is only so big. The
Right.
audience has only so much time and attention to dedicate, and so the audience has to become much more selective. Um, my dad said something very disturbing to me a few years ago. He came out to visit, and he said when he watches Netflix, if a movie doesn't have a familiar studio name in front of it, he won't watch it. My dad, I'm a product of, he raised me. He
Yeah.
raised
Yeah.
me to be weird, look for weird, unusual things. But I
Right.
guess maybe just because he's old now, he's in his twilight years, and I think maybe he just doesn't want to take those risks anymore himself. I don't. But it was disturbing. I said, Dad, what you're telling me is that if my movie comes on to a streaming
Right.
service, it's not going to have Paramount in front of it. So
Definitely
and
not.
he just said, "Sorry, son."
Yeah.
Okay, that's one person I know I won't be getting a review from on Amazon.
Yeah. All right. So we got a little bit of time here. I want to talk about, you are the first guest we've had on in 20 plus episodes that is also edits a magazine or lit mag or whatever as well. And so you are the editor for Pulp Modern. That's correct, right?
That is correct.
Okay. So and you've been doing that for a little bit, right?
Since 2011.
Okay, yeah. So
Yes.
so talk to me briefly. Tell me just kind of real briefly, kind of first off what Pulp Modern's about, and then how it's developed over the last decade or so.
Yeah, so I in 2010 I started an online site called All Due Respect, and the object was to have one writer's story on there for a month, so they get all due respect. That's why it was called All Due Respect. And then I learned about POD, print on demand, how
Mm-hmm.
easy it was to print a print journal, and so I wanted to just quickly move into that realm. So I handed off All Due Respect to Chris Radigan, and he turned it into a a little empire. I mean,
Nice.
he took it in directions I never imagined. And I started Pulp Modern. I was in graduate school at the time, and I was taking a course on postmodern literature. And I've always been a little bit multi-personality about what I want from fiction. I want entertaining fiction, but I also want it to be aesthetically sound. And I thought, well, let me, the phrase pulp modern came to mind because I was taking a postmodern course, and I thought, well, I'll start this pulp magazine that has all the genres in it, the major genres, except for romance. And I apologize for that, but I just couldn't see a magazine with crime and horror and westerns,
Mm-hmm.
blood and guts, also having a romance story. Romance, as I like to say, romance has its own kind of action.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, and I quickly learned that once that course was over, I realized I don't really like postmodernism, but I had to stick with the title, Pulp Modern. And so um, I experimented with it a lot in the beginning, trying to figure out how to gain more readers. And at one point, we did themed issues.
Mm-hmm.
And then I kept each issue, when I look at the sales numbers on uh, Create Space back then, I think it was called, and now it's KDP. I would say, well, this is really thankless. It's thankless for me, and it's thankless for the writers, right?
Right.
And so I'd announce I'm quitting, and then I would get all these emails from writers, and they'd say, please don't quit. We don't have places to send our stories. So I'd say, okay, I'll carry on. I'll chug on here. But finally, like in 2015, the sales on issue number 10 of that first volume were so dismal. I said, that's it. I just can't do it anymore. I have to focus on other things in life.
Sure.
And I guess it must be one of those things where I must secretly love the punishment. And about a year later, I was sitting in the bathroom looking at this magazine, The Digest Enthusiast, that had an interview with me in there. And it was so well done. And so I contacted the editor of that, Richard Krause, and I said, listen, what would you say about the two of us working together on bringing Pulp Modern back? And he was thrilled with the idea. He became the art director. He is a graphic design genius,
Nice.
and it made my job a lot easier. As you know, it's tough to read the pile of stories that come in, and so my role was diminished greatly. My
Yeah.
workload
Yeah.
was, and Richard, like Pulp Modern today, I think I will brag about it to the end of time. because what's great about Pulp Modern has almost nothing to do with me. We have the great Rand Scott is usually our illustrator. We have guys like Bob Vodko and Clark Dismeyer doing little cartoons. And, it's just there are all these elements that make it, I think a legitimate pulp magazine. So yeah, that's what it is. Right now we're kind of going into what you might call the third volume. Things are a little bit different now. We do invitation only for the writers, and there are big things on the horizon that are we want to keep a surprise, but some big things are going to happen for Pulp Modern very soon here.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Okay, so yeah, I look forward to seeing that. Yeah, so you talked about going through, the slush pile, for lack of a better term for it, right? Which is the market amount of work that you get in, and obviously we have to do that here as well. I go through every single submission that we get at Starlite Pulp, every single one I read, every single one, and then the other editors that I've got read most of them. Some of them don't get past the first round, and that's okay. I would say, I don't know about you, I want to hear what you have to say, but I would say probably about 25 to 30% are just absolute no's right off the bat. And sometimes it's not because they're bad stories. It's just they're not a fit at all, or I'm not quite sure why they thought this would be a pulp story or what have you. And then some are just not very well written, and that's okay. We were all young writers, and we were good writers then either. So both of those things are okay. It's just that there's probably 25, 30% that just right off the top just goes, immediately to the side. And then the rest get funneled forward into more rounds of editing, and then we start kind of putting them into different categories of, is this crime, is this horror, is this Western, is this, and how does this fit? And then as we start putting the issue together, we go, okay, how many of this do we have? How many do we have any of this? That kind of thing. And so what's the Pulp Modern editing experience like in that way?
It sounds almost exactly similar. I always want to give every story a full day in court. If our guidelines say, I think stories have to be between 20, right now it's between 2,000 and 3,500 words. Like I have a bizarre fixation with the idea that 3,500 words is the perfect length for a short story.
Okay.
And so I'll open up the submission and it's like 700 words. So I know right away this is not going to work.
Right.
Writers, one thing I've noticed is writers who don't follow the guidelines, very often their writing reflects where they are as writers.
Yeah.
Because I know when I was like 20, 21 in the very early 90s, I remember sending stories out that were single spaced, that were not formatted properly at all. And I was into the beat writers then. So, because I was lazy, I was like, oh, I don't have to, what my first draft, that's my naked thought. And that's what matters.
That was Ginsberg, right? First thought, best thought, or whatever it was.
Yeah. I think Ginsberg said that. Yeah. Not the best role model.
No.
And I was also, because I was young, I was doing other things to my brain that I shouldn't have been doing, and so I made bad decisions. But I see that with stories coming into Pulp Modern.
Yeah.
So that's when the writer doesn't follow the guidelines. I'll still give the story a read, but I'm almost never surprised that it just doesn't quite cut it. I'll tell you
and real quick, Alec, I just want to piggyback on that, because if there are writers watching this at some point who are wondering, same thing here. Like, if you for us, we have very few guidelines. Like, it's pretty simple, but one of the major ones is double space, just because it's way easier to read. And if you can't even follow that one, it's like come on guys, like, so it's kind of almost an automatic, all right, it just, and like you said, I'll read it, but it's like, the chances at that point, I mean, it needs to just, completely knock your socks off kind of thing. And that's not going to happen all that often. So it's same thing. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, for the more seasoned writers who know what they're doing, at least as far as that's concerned, I would say one of the biggest issues I see with stories that end up getting passed on is the story is 12 pages long, and by page 6, I still don't know what the conflict is. That's I try to tell writers, get to the conflict as quickly as humanly possible.
Sure.
And then the information, all that setup information that's important, you can backfill it. It can always be backfilled. There are ways to do that.
Right.
But the reader is going to want to know what's at stake here as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And halfway into the story, that's not going to. So that's my advice to the writers out there who at least read the guidelines.
Yeah. No, without question. I mean, it's interesting. I love reading them. There's so many that, obviously, just like you guys, there's so many that we end up passing on for whatever reason. Sometimes there's literally stories that I'm almost sad to pass on. Like I like them. I like the writing in it. I like aspects of it a lot, but ultimately it's just not a good fit. Or, at this point, we've already got 6 or 7 crime stories in this one. We're only going to have 14, 15 stories. I really can't have another one. So is it better than one of the ones we have? I don't know about that. So, that whatever it might be, but I love going through them. I really do. But it's an interesting thing, because you sit there. We've both been writers who have set, so many stories off in the past. And, and sometimes the requirements that you get are kind of, in my mind, asinine. And that's one of the things we didn't want to do with Starlite. We want to make it easy, because, the ones that have, if you've got 5 or 6 requirements for every story you want to send in, it's like, come on, guys, like, like I'm only sending in so many of these. So, but it's an interesting thing. I don't know. How are you with doing the rejection letters?
Well, because I have to do so many, I generally just send generalized letters out, or I forget what it's called, but just standard forms. And I it's worded so that, to encourage the writer.
Yeah.
Stories that make it to the later rounds, I will be a little bit more personalized with those, and I'll tell them, look, this made it to the last round. We just didn't have room for it.
Yep.
I would also say to writers out there, I've passed a lot of stories that I encountered later down the road in a different magazine, and realized, oh, this is pretty good. Your mood, everything affects everything that you do. Each day is different. I might be in a bad mood, and on that day, a particular kind of story is not going to sit well with me. So I really, for writers, I would say it's so subjective how stories are chosen, that to never take it personally. If an editor is kind enough to send some constructive criticism, take a look at it. Maybe it's maybe they're out of their minds. I've had personal comments from editors where they revealed they did not read the story in the comments they made. Those comments you can ignore, but if an editor says, hey, you need to get to the conflict faster, go ahead and look and see if that's something you need to do. And maybe the editor is full of crap. Who knows?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. Of course. So. And like you just mentioned, what I'm looking for and what you are looking for, that story might not be a fit for, but that it doesn't mean that it's not a good story. It doesn't mean that might not be, some other editor might read that and go, oh my gosh, this is what I've been looking for. It's just like you said, it is so subjective. It really is. And every single writer out there, I love the fact, honestly, I love the fact that you guys, anybody that's watching this, I love the fact that you guys send this stuff in. It's such a leap of faith in a lot of ways. It really is, to create something out of nothing and then be brave enough to say, okay, I'm going to send this off for it to be judged, is, in and of itself, a bit of a victory. So, I appreciate the hell out of that. I really do. And that's why we read them all. And the vast majority get read by more than just me. Jake Naturman helped out on this last, the third edition for us, the third issue, and he just brought a wonderful voice and helped out a lot, gave me some serious food for thought on a few pieces where I, a couple that there were a couple I might have taken where he brought in a voice and I went, oh, okay, that's a really interesting take, thank you. And then vice versa, some that I was kind of like, probably not, but just take a look at it anyway. And then it was, he brought in a completely nuanced kind of voice to it that just made me go, wow, okay. So it's like Alec just brought up, it's so it is so subjective. So just, if you're sending your stuff out, keep doing it. I don't know about you, Alec, but when I send stories out, or when I have over the years, my rule was whenever I got a rejection notice, I'd send 2 out. So if I got a story back that was rejected, I'd immediately send 2 more out, just like bam, like that day or that night or whatever. Because like you said, you cannot take it personally. Just, it's a shell game, it's a numbers game. As a writer, it just keep sending them out. Now, of course, there are some magazines you really want to get in. It's like there are those that where the one where you're like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to, hopefully I get this one. But at the end of the day, you just got to keep sending it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And make sure you understand the market and who that magazine is kind of intended for. I've gotten stories, because I'm known as somebody who kind of champions free speech. I've gotten stories that are way off the charts in terms of whether it's sex or violence or whatever.
Sure. Just,
and Pulp,
you just mean like gratuitous.
Yeah.
I figured.
And Pulp Modern, I've really tried to keep Pulp Modern somewhat socially acceptable. I've always wanted to maybe someday walk into a dentist office and see that somebody's left a Pulp Modern right next to the Good Housekeeping.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's never going to happen, but that's so when people send me this, a very good friend of mine sent me a story that I think Henry Miller would have written when he was being paid to write pornography. And I said, I can't put this in my magazine. It's not what we publish here. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it.
Right.
And I'm not going to tell the writer, hey, clean that up. We can't have that around here. But I don't know. That's just for the writers there are writers who are going to do really outrageous things. Make sure the market, whether or not that market is appropriate for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Ever had any I'm just curious because as with Starlite, we're in the CLMP, which is the Community of Literary Magazines and Press, or whatever it is. But it's clmp.org. Anyways, we're in that, and so because of that, one of the cool things about it is that we get on these email chains where there'll be all these magazines that we've all heard of, right? The New Orleans Review and Plowshares and shit like that. And they're on these, and they're on these email chains, and they'll write this stuff that just like blows my brain sometimes, where they'll be like, we had an author, and then we accepted the story, but then they wanted the name changed, and then it went to print, and it was printed, but then they said they wanted an edit of it, and it's already in copy, and just these absolutely nightmare stories. Have you ever had any kind of strange author requests like that?
Not really, actually. I guess I've been pretty lucky that
That's
way.
awesome.
Um, yeah, I can't think of one instance like that. I had somebody was upset with Pulp. We briefly did this thing called Pulp Modern Flash, where we published flash fiction online,
Uh-huh.
and it just got to be too much work.
Yeah, I bet.
But some writer was dissatisfied about something and was angry that we didn't put his pronouns next to his name.
Mm.
And so I was like, oh, okay, it's an easy enough fix. That's really the only time I've had a writer come back and say, hey, this is not they will. I've had writers send in newer versions of the story before we went to press.
Yeah, yeah. No, I've
And
had that. Yeah,
so again, it's like, well, okay, we've got time. Let's
yeah.
throw it in there. Yeah.
Well, anyway, I'm just letting you know, Alec. I read some of these things, and I'm like, oh my goodness, thank God. There's like, people are talking legal action out there and suing and all this stuff, and it's just like, wow, just guys, like, and they'll be putting it out in the forum, like, what can we do about this, or what would you have done, and things like that. And you sit there and I mean, it's crazy sometimes what people will ask. But like you said, we haven't. I mean, we're only 3 issues in, so obviously much smaller scale, but we haven't had any of that either, and that's been good. But I read this stuff and I'm kind of like, whoa,
Yeah,
So
now I'll ask you this. There's in the beginning with Pulp Modern and even All Due Respect, occasionally I would get a crime story that opened with the absolute most brutal murder, usually of a woman. And you read on and you realize the writer hates women. He absolutely hates women, like the true definition of a misogynist. And I just reject them outright at that
yeah.
point. I'm like, I don't want to read this. So I'm just curious, do you ever, I mean, because it's like the writer is revealing to you, I've got some psychological problems. Not just all writers have psychological problems. We wouldn't be doing this if we didn't.
Yeah.
But like the really disturbing kind.
No, I agree. I and yes, often, I mean, the majority of the time it's going to be with women, unfortunately, but it can be really anything. I mean, it can just over the top, gratuitous violence or sexual violence, something like that doesn't add anything to the
Mm.
story. It doesn't. There's if there's no reason for it, there's no reason to include it. Um Now weird is fine. Weird is good, but just being over the top and really in the sense that it doesn't, like I said before, the main thing is it really doesn't add anything from a narrative aspect to it. It doesn't make sense. And like you said, no, I've actually had a couple like that where I've just actually stopped reading them about 2/3
Mhm.
through, and I'm just like, yeah, this isn't, and so that happens some. But and I imagine for them, in a funny way, I imagine for them it's an outlet, you know.
Let's hope
Um,
so.
yeah, exactly. Let's hope so, because it's certainly, much. It's a hell of a lot better to write about it than do
Uh,
it. But
Yeah,
but
I don't get those. I
yeah,
was just because I don't get them anymore. It was just early on, like around 2011, 2012. They just kept coming in, and I was like, I don't know what you think this magazine is, but
hmm hmm no, but
if you,
we do get
yeah,
those for sure. Is there are some stories we get that are just, like, who do you? think you're sending this off to?
Hmm.
You know, like,
Right.
why would you think? Did you just, just randomly, like, just pick a lit bag and just submit this? Because it doesn't, this
Mhm.
good story or not, even if this was well written in it, we wouldn't publish this in 100 years. This isn't what we do. So why send it here? Why it, I don't get that part. But I think, like you mentioned earlier, I think that sometimes writers, there are a limited amount of outlets out there. There really
Hmm.
are. And so I think that, at some point you take a risk and you send it off and you hope that, and I'm not justifying it. I think it's stupid if it's, if you don't do the research, like, so Alec, we both know, you've seen this 100 times so by, where somebody will say, an editor will say, take a look at our review or magazine or anthology first before you submit. I guarantee you 99% of writers don't do that.
Hmm.
They don't. I have personally been guilty of that before, where I'll look at something and I'm not going to order the magazine to see if I want to submit. I mean, it's like I was just talking about this recently with somebody. I think it was Terrence on the Suit Up podcast, but I submitted something to Agatha Christie
Hmm.
or Alfred Hitchcock, one of the two, one of those.
Yeah.
And it was a story I didn't think it would make it because it was more kind of hardcore noir. They like the more like cozy mystery kind of, locked room kind of stuff, which I know. But I submitted it anyway. They took 18 months to get back to me.
Hmm.
I mean, that's what writer has that kind of time? You don't sit around for 18 months and then you're not supposed to send simultaneous submissions at the same time. I mean, come on.
Do
That's
they do they say no simultaneous
Yeah,
submissions there?
that's
Oh,
crazy.
really?
I mean, what, who, I just don't even, that just boggles my mind. Like with Starlite, we'll usually take 2 months, to get back.
Yeah.
That's probably standard. Could be a month, could be maybe 2.5, but it's right in there. Um, I don't understand something like that. Like, it seems to me like your staff is either way too small or you're getting way too many submissions. And if you're getting way too many submissions, you either need to change the guidelines or start charging more, because if you're getting, like, for example, here's another thing, Alec. Uh on that little CLMP email thing, I believe it was New Orleans Review. I could be wrong, but I think it was New Orleans Review. They said they get 7,000 submissions a year.
Hmm.
If we got 7,000 submissions a year, I wouldn't. I mean, I couldn't. We couldn't handle that. No way, no way. So, and I believe the submissions there are free. But of course, for them it's different because they're with an AWP program, so they have a whole army of free labor who are grad students that they can just throw submissions at. Which, by the way, I did when I was at USC, right, with
Hmm.
the Southern California Anthology. That's where I got the experience for this stuff. Is I was free labor for them, so it was just Brian will handle that stack over there. Um, but 7,000 submissions is a lot of submissions. You know,
Hmm. Oh, yeah.
so yeah. So I mean, that's the kind of thing where and if you get 7,000 submissions, I understand. You're not personally responding to everyone. I mean, that's crazy. So yeah, it's a weird game out there, man.
Yeah, I'm a little bit worried. I just withdrew a story that I've been trying to get an Alfred Hitchcock for probably 15 years now, and they just don't want me. But I keep I
Yep.
keep sending stories. But I had to withdraw one because it got picked up someplace else,
Oh, good.
and I didn't realize. I think, yeah, they take far too long to say no simultaneous submissions. That's not fair.
Yeah.
That they can blacklist me and never publish me for saying that out loud, but that is not fair.
Oh,
If you're
silly.
going to take
Yeah.
a year and a half to
For one story.
consider,
I mean, yeah.
what's that?
I said for one story, a year
Yeah,
and a
yeah.
half.
If you're going to, yeah, a year and a half on somebody's story, they should have the right to shop it around while you're taking your time there.
Yeah,
I'm continue. I really like those magazines. Ellery Queen and Alfred Hitchcock. They're like the last surviving,
pretty much.
along with Asimov and I think fantasy and science fiction and analog. Those are the five big time pulps, and I think every pulp writer wants to be in them. Um, but that's 18 months is amazing. That's amazing.
I, here's the thing, Alec. I had forgotten I ever sent it off at that point, so I was literally showing it to my wife, like, "Oh my gosh, look at this!" Like, I
Right.
didn't even know it was still. Yeah, that's just crazy, and that, but from a magazine perspective, from a Pulp Modern or a Starlight Pulp review, that should never happen. I mean, you should never make a writer wait 18 months for a story. We're not talking about a manuscript. We're not talking about, a collection of stories. One story, 18 months.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. That's silly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's been a bit here, Alec. You have been a great guest. I appreciate you. This is the new book that Alec has out. Alec Cizak, Nobody's Coming Home. Excellent little short story collection of crime fiction, and very well written, very succinct, very efficient, and I highly recommend it to anybody out there. Having said that, I believe Pulp Modern has a new issue out as well. Is that correct?
That is correct. Pulp
Yes.
Modern Die Laughing. It's all horror with a little bit of a humorous angle.
Okay. So Pulp Modern has a new one out, and I want to throw out that Starlight Pulp Review #3 is going to be out in less than a month. So by December, early December, we'll have their third review out as well, and that'll be on our site as well as Instagram and all that. So holiday shopping, look no further, right? We got Pulp Modern, we got Starlight Pulp Review #3, we got Nobody's Coming Home. Alec Cizak, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate you. Hang out just a second, and everybody else, have a great night.
Thank you.
In this topsy turvy